Costa is brought to you by FQM Trident Limited, a subsidiary of First Quantum Minerals Limited. For the past 30 years, Zambia has been a regional model of peaceful and multi-party political transitions, yet corruption and persistent democratic weaknesses threaten the stability. The August 2021 elections ushered in Zambia's third transition of political power, offering opportunities for democratic governance and fiscal reforms, while setting high public expectations for the government to deliver on democratic dividends. Prominent historian in Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa argues that nearly 3 years after the election of the New Dawn UPND government, the democratic space in Zambia has been shrinking, and that President Hichilema will more than likely be defeated in August of 2026 owing to a faltering economy and deep divisions on ethnic regional lines. This is also against a backdrop that the VDEM report equally indicated that Zambia's democracy had been enhanced under the New Dawn, and we question whether these assertions of the VDEM report are true. Now, in the past week, the country shifted attention to the Anti-Corruption Commission. Obviously, the Financial Intelligence Center report a significant 133% increase in the value of suspicious transactions were revealed, from 5.8 billion in 2022 to over 13.5 billion in 2023. We witnessed the forced resignation of Director General at the Anti-Corruption Commission in Tom Shamakamba later on, the day after President Hichilema dissolving the entire board at the Anti-Corruption Commission. Tonight on Costa, we discuss the New Dawn's commitment in fighting corruption and indeed the state of our country's democracy. I'll be right back shortly after this break. Good evening and welcome to Costa with me, Costa Mwansa. My guest on the program this evening is historian Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa. He joins me virtually from his base in South Africa. Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa, it's a pleasure to host you on Costa this evening. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Costa, and good evening, viewers.
I think let's begin with the happenings from last week. The FIC report triggered it all with suspicious transactions, but there came a damning observation from Dr. Brian Kaba, who was at the time of making those observations serving as commissioner on the Anti-Corruption Commission. His revelations obviously spiraled into what we are now being informed as a forced resignation of then Director General to the Anti-Corruption Commission in Tom Shamakamba, following a letter, or rather a complaint by the former board to the president over acts of rather incompetence or souring relationship between the former DG and the former board. And obviously this hindered around aspects of disagreements around how certain cases around forfeiture or the corruption crusade itself was being handled. In your opinion, Dr. Sishuwa, where does this leave the Anti-Corruption Commission in terms of public confidence and indeed the entire fight against corruption?
Thank you so much, Costa. I think you've raised a number of issues there that require unpacking. The first one has to do with the revelation made by Dr. Brian Kaba, a University of Zambia law lecturer, who was also until recently a board member of the Anti-Corruption Commission. He made a statement to the effect that President Hakainde Hichilema's fight against corruption, or the new Donor administration's fight against corruption, had crumbled. He hinted that there was corruption presided over by state chambers, and that the Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission, Tom Shamakamba, who subsequently had to resign, and the Solicitor General Marshall Muchende were receiving kickbacks. It is important to state that that statement by Carver simply confirmed what many people, what many institutions, had been saying about the lack of political will on the part of the new administration to fight corruption. The difference perhaps this time was that it came from somebody who was generally seen as supportive of the new administration, because when I raised some of these issues last year in June, pointing out that Hichilema lacks the political will to fight corruption, and his strategy appears to be to cover corruption and protect the officials involved in corruption rather than fight it. Carver and his friends were actually very defensive of the new administration. So it was refreshing to hear him coming to the same conclusion that many Zambians, many institutions, including those remaining civil society organizations that are quite critical of the new administration's failings, had been saying all along. Opposition parties, Costa, have been raising the same issues about the corruption in government, whether it's in relation to fertilizer tender, whether it's in relation to the increase in the number of suspicious transactions that, as reviewed by the Financial Intelligence Center, whether it's in relation to the Ministry of Health example, but there was no listening ear. So what was different this time, or that this came from somebody who was quite supportive of the new administration. And of course, the fact that he's a member of the board of the Anti-Corruption Commission, I think also rendered credibility to his views, because even though he didn't speak in his capacity as an ACC board member, if you read this statement that he put up, he was speaking as an academic. But one could actually argue that, if what Carver said was said by you, Costa, or by any other member of the Anti-Corruption Commission who was not seen as supportive of the government, I do think that the response would have been different. The government may even have said, well, you are sharing with the public information that you have come in contact with by virtue of your position as a board member of the Anti-Corruption Commission, and therefore what you have done violates the State Securities Act. You are going to be arrested over this. But because it was somebody who was close to the establishment, the response was different. What we saw was the resignation of the Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission, Tom Shamakamba, as a consequence of that statement. Now, the resignation in itself, I must say, Costa, is a good thing, because it paves the way for Tom Shamakamba to be investigated. I hope that, his resignation will not end there. We need to understand the nature of the allegations leveled against him, the seriousness of them, and the right thing to do is for Tom to be investigated and potentially be prosecuted, and if found guilty, sent to jail. Just
to weigh in there, Dr. Sishuwa, where does this leave people then like Dr. O'Brien Carver, who in this particular instance is like a whistleblower? Why do you deem it fit for the president to go ahead and dissolve the entire board? Are we saying that the board in itself is also laced or tainted with either incompetence or part of this corruption?
Well, the Costa, as I said, there are separate issues here. There's the resignation of the board, which is a separate matter from, the dissolution of the board, which is a separate matter from the resignation of the ACC Director General. The resignation of the ACC Director General, in my view, given the allegations that were made in public domain by Dr. Carver, was inevitable. And there were only two ways he could go. One was what he did, which is to resign, and I hope that he'll be investigated and prosecuted. The other thing was for the president to constitute a tribunal, because you have to understand how the ACC Director General can be removed. He can be removed in the manner that is applicable to a judge, where you constitute a tribunal, you investigate the tribunal, then sits to consider the allegations leveled against him. It's a fair way of ensuring that he gets a chance to prove his case, whether he's innocent or not. But he avoided that route, perhaps suggesting that he may have been, afraid that he would be embarrassed by the nature of the liberation that may be presented to the tribunal, which, in my view, would have been actually a fair way of going about this process, because he would have enabled people who have serious allegations against him to come forward and make their case, and it would have enabled him as well to make sure that he responds to those allegations. But the fact that he has resigned, I think, is a very good thing, because it should pave the way for the resignation, for the investigation. As the president said, I think it was news diggers the other day who said President Hichilema encouraged Shamakamba to resign to pave way for investigation. Now, I know that was a very, very positive spin around the issue. The idea there was to demonstrate that Hichilema is opposed to what Shamakamba was doing, and therefore he had to exert pressure on him to resign. The problem with that kind of narrative is that it puts the president in a position where it appears that he didn't know what Tom was doing. Hichilema knew. There's no one, sensible Zambian, who'd be convinced that whatever Shamakamba was doing was unknown to Hichilema. He knew that. The other point, of course, is that if you are getting Tom Shamakamba to resign in order to pave way for investigations, then Solicitor General Marshall Muchende, who the ACC, in a statement recently said they have been investigating for the past 1 year, should have also gone, because you can't have two, treatment over the same issue. One, you are saying this person should resign, this official should resign to pave way for investigations, but the one who is already facing investigations remained in office. In fact, if you read the allegations leveled by Carver against Shamakamba, he was very specific about the Solicitor General, but he's still in office.
Just there, Dr. Sishuwa, hang on. Is there a gap, really, historically, in our statutes, in terms of the fact that when a public officer is under investigation, it's not automatic that they should resign, and from history I think it's been a practice of only calling on their moral conscience. Does the law cover or expect such an individual to resign? And I'm aware that Solicitor General Marshall Muchende has equally sued, it should be Dr. Kaba, on this particular matter of discussion. Do the statutes provide for that, or we are just calling on their moral conscience?
The resignation is a moral issue. Tom would have been given credit if he's the one who resigned on his volition to say, look, the allegations leveled against me are very serious, and for the sake of the respect that I occupy, for the sake of the respect that I have for the office that I occupy, I'm stepping down to pave the way for investigations. But news diggers told us, quoting sources at State House, that he didn't resign on his own volition. It was Hichilema who told him to resign so that he could pave the way for he could be an investigator. And that's why I'm saying it's hypocritical.
We're equally aware, Dr. Sishuwa, that his bosses then, the board, had written on occasion to the president over their doubts on the aspect of confidence, but also on concerns about some matters in the manner in which he handled them, the Director General. But let's talk more to the Solicitor General. I'm asking around you calling for his resignation. Does the law provide for that?
If you allow me to make these 2 points, I think that would cover the question very well.
Go ahead.
The point I was making, Costa, is that if Shamakamba had resigned on his own volition, then we are going to commend him for taking that decision, because it shows that he has an active conscience, one that doesn't allow him to be investigated over serious matters while he's heading a very serious institution tasked with fighting corruption. But you have been told that he didn't resign on this revolution. He resigned because the president wanted him to go. And I'm saying that hypocrisy of wanting one official out so that they could be investigated, and allowing another official in Marshal Muchende to remain in office while he's already facing investigation that he wants to subject Tom Shamakamba to demonstrate my point that what Tom was doing had the blessings of the president. But we must understand that the resignation of Tom Shamakamba was meant, in my view, to facilitate the dismissal of the board. Because how do you explain, Costa, the fact that the person who was mentioned by Carver very explicitly alongside Shamakamba in Solicitor General Marshal Muchende is still in government, he's still in office, and he has even come out arrogantly to say, I'm not going to resign. If Hichilema was committed to fight against corruption, even if Muchende says, I want to resign, he could have paved the way for his removal as provided for by law. The second point I wanted to illustrate through this drama of what happened this week is that, it demonstrates both the institutional and the individual weaknesses in relation to the fight against corruption. At the institutional level, you must understand, Costa, that the ACC board has no power to take matters to court. That responsibility lies in the hands of the Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission. So if Hichilema is really committed to fighting corruption, he must have instituted institutional reforms that would have resulted in the following. The first point would have been to make sure that the appointment model of the Director General of ACC is changed. Because as it stands now, the one who appoints the Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission is the President. But the President also appoints the board. The Director General, who is the head of management of the ACC, should be answerable to the board so that if at all management fails, the board can have the power to recall the Director General to dismiss him. But because Tom knew that he was appointed by Hichilema, he wasn't answerable to the board. That's why when you look at the O'Brien Carver statement, you could see a disconnect between the board and the management of the Anti-Corruption Commission. So the institutional weakness that we need to address.
Just a rider there, Dr. Sishuwa. Does the ratification of these portfolios by Parliament not give insulation or autonomy to the DG and the ACC board?
I don't think the problem with what happened was the lack of autonomy of the DG. It was the matter of accountability. To whom is the DG answerable? Is it to the president who appointed him, or is it to the board? What does the ACC
Act say? Who does the DG report to? I'm assuming it's to the board.
Well, if he reports to the board but is appointed by the president, then there's a problem there. But you have to understand that this loophole in our law is a function of the 2016 constitutional amendment, which made the Anti-Corruption Commission a constitutional body. So the 2012 ACC Act, for example, is yet to be amended in a way that would make it very clear that the ACC, for example, the ACC Director General, for example, is appointed by the board and is answerable to the board, for example. So if we are really committed to fighting corruption, what we want to do at the first measure is to strengthen the ACC Act and make it very clear that the Director General will be appointed by the board and is answerable to the board, so that if the management fails, then you can dissolve the board on the basis that the management has failed because the board was not performing its function. But in this case, you can't say Musa Mwenye and his team, or Brian Carver and them, who you could actually say were very committed to fight against corruption, because you saw them pushing the Director General to take some of these matters to court. You could say that the board was very, very keen to fight corruption, but they were undermined by management led by a Director General who was closer to those in the executive of government than to the board, who should have actually been answerable to him. So the solution to that is to change the law, to make sure that the board is appointed by and answerable to the board itself. That in itself is not enough, however. Even if you have a good law in place, then you have to make sure that the individuals you appoint to these institutions are men and women with a traceable record of fighting corruption. You tell me first, why did the Hichilema appoint Tom Shamakamba? What record of fighting corruption does Tom have? Even if you have a very good law, and you appoint, individuals that are incompetent, they have no record of commitment fighting corruption. You are not going to achieve much in the way of fighting corruption.
As you raise that concern, Dr. Sishuwa, one remembers that during the appointment of the former DG, I think it should have been the Law Association of Zambia that expressed their opposition. But I asked you earlier, and I'll get back to this question, what message then do you think President Hichilema is trying to communicate or give in asking the ACC DG to resign, dissolving the entire board? Where does this leave confidence of the entire commission and the corruption fight? Because it seems that President Hichilema has not yet gotten it right in terms of his appointments. It's not so long ago that we had the former DG transferred to be Director of Public Prosecution. So it's like we're still experimenting on who best fits. Now we have no board, now we have no DG.
I think there are two messages that this sent. One, it confirms Hichilema's lack of political will to fight corruption. The problem at the Anti-Corruption Commission was not the board. The problem was management of the Anti-Corruption Commission, led by Tom Shamakamba. And as I said, Tom Shamakamba should never have ended there in the first place, because what criteria was used to appoint him to that position, outside his association with the UPND, for example? You should never appoint people to key positions on the basis that they are supporters or associated with the ruling party, for example. What should matter is the merit, the competence, the track record of fighting corruption, for example. We couldn't say that about Tom Shamakamba. Hichilema never went, public to explain why, for example, he thought Shamakamba was the right person to fight corruption. Now, the other message this sends is that, the board of the Anti-Corruption Commission, I think should go out with their head very high, because I don't think there's anybody who has raised questions about the board's commitment to fight corruption. What you see, actually, that Hichilema was looking for an opportunity to get rid of the board, and the cover liberation, for example, enabled him or facilitated his desire to get rid of this board. Because if you removed Tom Shamakamba, and I'm very convinced about this, if Shamakamba had gone the way he has gone, and you have the Deputy Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission, that woman, I think, in my view, is very committed to fight against corruption. If you have an independent board that is committed to fighting corruption, led by Musa Mwenye and Brian Cover and their team, and then you have a Director General of the Anti-Corruption Commission who is also committed, they were going to move for people like Marshall Mchene, because they told us in a statement to say, Marshall has been investigated, we have been investigating Marshall for the past, 1 year, and our investigations have reached an advanced stage. There is a very good possibility that the ACC board and the new leadership of the ACC, led by the acting Director General, would have moved for Marshall on the basis of the evidence that they probably have acquired or accumulated against him in the case that they were investigating him on. So what does he do? Hichilema dissolves the ACC board on the ground that he's committed to fighting corruption. He's not. He's actually protecting the Solicitor General. And one is made to ask, why is Hichilema so protective of Marshall? You can't be so protective of an individual over a public reputation of that office or public interest. The correct thing to do is to make sure that if Tom
you're making assumptions, Dr. Sishuwa, that
you should also remove the Solicitor General.
You're making assumptions that President Hichilema is protecting, Solicitor General Marshall Mchene. Those are your assumptions.
No, let me clarify that, because we are told that Hichilema is committed to the fight against corruption, and because of that commitment, he told the ACC Director General Tom Shamakamba at the time to resign so that he could face prosecution. Can you explain to me then why he is not telling the Solicitor General, who is already facing investigations, to follow the same example? Why are you creating two rules for the same officials under the same government?
Yeah, the constitution of our country obviously guarantees a presumption of innocence. So in both Tom Shamakamba's case and Solicitor General Majo Mchende, as long as they have not been prosecuted before any court of competent jurisdiction and convicted, for now, we shall use the presumption of innocence that they are innocent until proven guilty. But with that said...
You are right, Costa. Costa, you are right in stating that, and no one is saying Shamakamba and Mchende is guilty. No one is saying that. But we are saying that it is wrong for the Solicitor General to remain in office while he is facing investigations as confirmed by the Anti-Corruption Commission. Why can't he be suspended or even resign so that if he's cleared at the end of this process, Hichilema will be free to appoint him? But you can't have an official leading such an important office remaining in office while he's facing very serious allegations. We are not saying he's guilty. We are saying, can he step forward? Can he step down the way Shamakamba has been made to step down, so that the officers, other officers of government tasked with the responsibility of investigations can conclude their case against him without any interference?
With that said, Dr. Sishuwa, then what should we expect as a way forward? Right now, the public confidence, the image of the Anti-Corruption Commission is at zero because you have no Director General. He's been forced to resign over allegations. You've got a board that has been dissolved. Obviously, a new board, a new DG have to be put in place. But do you see President Hichilema really being committed to instituting a tribunal to investigate these allegations against Tom Shamakamba? Do you see President Hichilema moving on to ensure that justice and investigations are brought before Solicitor General? And moreover, just present-day corruption cases?
There's no need to constitute a tribunal anymore against Tom Shamakamba because he has resigned. You only constitute a tribunal if that person hasn't resigned, for example. In relation to Tom Shamakamba, what should happen next is that we should see investigations against him, and based on the result that the officers uncover, he should be prosecuted. It's not enough for him to simply resign and then hope that the public should accept that and abandon the case. No, we are interested in seeing to it that he clears himself against the allegations made against him. So the state should move in, investigate him as they could have done to a tribunal, and make sure that if there's anything they find there, he should face prosecution. On the issue of the fight against corruption, Costa, I've been very consistent on this one. Hichilema lacks the political will to fight corruption. I hear people sometimes comparing President Levi Mwanawasa. That's an insult to the memory of Levi Mwanawasa, because Levi was very decisive when it came to fighting corruption. If your officials are accused of corruption, they were removed. Gladys Nyurongo was Minister of Lands. She was arrested and even prosecuted and subsequently convicted. When she was still a minister, Levi dropped her from her cabinet. There are other examples, for example. Can you tell me a single person that President Hichilema has a senior official that Hichilema has removed from office on account of serious allegations leveled against them, for example?
Maybe because there's been no, hard evidence against any of his officials. Dr. Sishuwa, do we have any specific case in point before either the ACC or maybe DEC of his cabinet or close allies? There have been many cases of very serious allegations of corruption. We can't prove these in the court of public opinion. They have to be taken to court. And the government itself, through their respective institutions, have to be simply proactive to investigate these, whether it's ministers who are involved, whether it's PSO officials, whether it's the president himself. In my view, Costa, the fight against corruption, has been failing for two reasons. The first is the lack of example. You see, you can't fight corruption as a president if you're not leading by example. You want to demonstrate that the best way of fighting corruption, if, for example, President Hichilema could have published his assets, for example, and declaration, the one that he declared the asset in 2021, to ensure that even his officials under him can be motivated to make sure that they do the same. We know also that way to say when he went into office, he was worth this much. He has refused to do so. And we're not saying that he should do something outside what he did to the East, for example. It's simply a question of saying, in the name of transparency, a ticket on which I was elected,
I'm going beyond what the law provides for to make sure that I share with the public my assets declaration that I made the ECZ in 2021 when standing for presidency. I'm doing so to make sure that if you see my companies or companies which I have an interest competing for government tenders, you should be able to raise concern, say, how did this company end up with this tender when you had other companies that were better before it? He has not done so. You can't really demand from other people, including your officials under you, what you are not willing to give. The second weakness, in my view, is the institutional setup of the asset declaration example. We require a number of junior officers to make, their asset declaration, but we don't require a sitting president. There's no law that requires a sitting president, for example, to do that.
So
we only have one that requires a presidential candidate.
It's the lapse in the law, and others would argue that it's not President Hichilema's fault then that he has not declared, because the law does not require him to do so beyond the ECZ.
Oh, but that's where personal leadership, for example, comes in. You can't defend yourself on the basis that I'm violating no law. Leadership is at two levels, Costa. One is, of course, you have to do what the law provides for. And if you are in government, the government has to operate within the law. The government has to do what the law provides for. You and I, as citizens, we can do anything that is not illegal. Okay? But for the president, illegality is acting outside what the law provides. Now, he could have gone further to say, I know that the law doesn't provide for this, but for the sake of transparency and example, I'm going out of my way to give you the same documents I gave to the ECZ, for example, in 2021, as a moral leadership in the fight against corruption. Has he done that? He hasn't. And I'm saying, what is he hiding? What do you lose by simply reproducing the same document that you gave to the Electoral Commission of Zambia? Of course, the response from the government has been to say, there's no law that requires him to do so, because the PF changed the law in 2016 that previously ensured that these declarations were published. That's true. The UPND were part of that change. In fact, the Constitutional Amendment 2016 could not have passed without the support of the UPND MP. So rather than saying the PF changed, you should say we changed it in 2016, we meaning the PF and the UPND, because they worked together to remove those clauses. If you remember, during the 2016 Constitutional Amendment discussions in the Parliament, the UPND MP had position on clauses that they didn't like. The very fact that there's no record of them opposing the removal of that provision meant that they supported it as well. Now, that doesn't stop the president from saying, here's what the law provides for. But as an example of leadership in the fight against corruption, I'm going beyond what the law provides for to publish my assets, to raise my assets, the same one he gave to the Electoral Commission of Zambia. That way, we can know that the extent of his involvement in our economy, for example, because we don't know whether Hichilema's companies are competing for government tenders. And if they are getting those tenders by favorable treatment.
Let's still stick on this discussion around the efforts under the New Dawn administration that are just slightly under 3 years, in power. When they came, one of the things they've done is through the Office of the Chief Justice put an SI, Economic and Financial Fast-Track Courts. In one of your articles of June 13th, you had an issue with these economic crimes courts, and the president obviously going onto the floor of Parliament saying that justice now will be dispensed in 5 months. But on the other hand, we've heard officials say corruption is so systemic that it's not easy to root it out in just 2 years, 11 months. Do you agree with these arguments and the efforts that are being put in place so far?
I think that there are 2 points that can be said there, Costa. The first is that who came with this idea? Who came up with this idea? If you remember what based on what in the public domain so far, the idea of the fast track court and the 5 months period were both announced by State House. But by law, they should come from the judiciary. So if the origins are in the executive, as demonstrated by the fact that President Hichilema was the first one to even announce this, brag about the idea that this fast track court is coming, it will be 5 months period, for example, then it shows you that the political origins of this idea color the expected outcomes. This is, on its own, it could be a very good idea to say, okay, the judiciary as an institution has the power to make this kind of recommendations. The intention must be good. The problem, Costa, is that if you limit this idea of fast-track court or 5 months, for example, to the High Court alone, then what happens to the Court of Appeal? What happened to the Supreme Court? You must justify why you think it is important to have this 5 months period at the High Court level in relation to these corruption cases alone compared to other cases, for example, like the general division of the High Court, for example. Because if the motivation is to say we need to increase the rate at which cases are concluded, they're taking years, then you could say, well, that's a very good suggestion. Because if I remember the cases of somebody like Tere Kalumba, for example, it took 20 years. So you need some kind of mechanism to ensure that these cases are concluded within a reasonable time. But the problem with that is, why are you limiting this thing to only this particular fast-track court and not extending it to the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, or even the Constitutional Court as well? So if it's a well-meant, you should not exempt the other courts, for example, from following the same trend. The very fact that is only one division of the court, the fast-track court, that is enjoying this for 5 months, explains why it should have come to the judicial, so that we can ask them to explain what it is that motivated this thinking, for example. That's the first point. The second point is that we often say justice delayed is justice denied, Costa. But we can also say justice rushed is injustice, because some of these cases are complex. You have to be outraged not just by the longevity with which it takes to conclude cases in Zambia's courts, but you also have to understand why it takes long. Why do judges take long to conclude their case, for example? It may be that some of these courts, for example, are manned by very few people. If you look at the General Division of the High Court, for example, there are very few judges that man in comparison to the cases that they receive in a given year. So you can't expect Costa. If Costa is getting on average 200 cases per year, you can't expect Costa to conclude that case within 5 months. What you are likely to have are some kind of judgments that are just formal. You see, you just have to make sure that you have a judgment that is there because you have to comply with this 5 months requirement. But that would be an injustice because some of the cases are complex that require more than 5 months. We saw this in the relation to the presidential petition, for example. They say 14 days. You remember in 2016, the judges came up and said it wasn't actually enough, and they ended up prematurely concluding that matter. And it was a source of conflict for the next 5 years. Now, what rationale, for example, was used to come up with 5 months to say this is a sufficient period? Why not 1 year, for example? That's why, if it was judiciary, Mumba Malira, for example, the chief justice, should face the media and explain what thinking motivated his institution to come up with a 5 months period and then to exclude other courts from that 5 months requirement.
Dr. Sishuwa, there's also a point of disagreement in the fight against corruption, but obviously nothing is illegal about this. I'm talking about the Forfeiture of Proceeds of Crimes Act of 2010, which provides for the confiscation of proceeds of crime. Now, the argument obviously is that the investigative wings in terms of the ACC at times or the DEC are sort of striking deals with people who have looted public resources or found wanting on proceeds of crime, and the case in point that Dr. Kaba was giving, where somebody's found wanting of amounts ranging $60 million and $22 million is forfeited back. I know in the last press conference the president did also advocate for the fact that there should be forfeiture and then prosecution. What is your take on this? Is forfeiture a rightful tool in winning the fight against corruption?
Well, not on its own. The Act of 2020 provides for the confiscation, as you say, of the proceeds of crime. But you see, what is problematic about the way that Act is being implemented now is that those who looted or who are alleged to have looted public funds are being allowed to bring what they looted or a share what they looted and then go scot-free. So if, for example, you allege that Ngolungu got so and so much money, you ask him, so can you retain a percentage of this money, and then you are going to go scot-free. That's where I have a problem. You should recover the assets, but that should not be the end. You should also prosecute those people involved, because you see, if you get what does not belong to you, Costa, it means you are required to say, bring back of store, and then I'll let you go scot-free. It means you can be appointed to public office, including the very office of which you actually gave yourself what doesn't belong to you, what belongs to the public. If you look at the ACC Act, the ACC Act of 2012 provides that those convicted for asset recoveries for crimes of that kind, for example, which are covered by the Act, they cannot be appointed to public office or stand for election for 5 years. That's punity. Number one. But the second one is that if you are convicted, Costa, if I may finish this point, there's a stain on your name to say Costa stole this and that much amount of money. There's a record. That in itself is sufficient punishment for you not to do it again, and to deter other people to say, if I steal, I won't just be required to retain what I've stolen. I'll actually be prosecuted. And if I'm found guilty, this is a stain on my name. That's how you fight corruption. I was going to... Asset recovery and the prosecution route should be encouraged. But what we are seeing now is the abuse of that act, Costa. If you allow me to develop this point further, Article 18, I think it's Article 18 of the Constitution of Zambia, states that anybody accused of a crime is deemed innocent until proven guilty. So when you are charged with an offense, for example, you are charged with this one, you either have the option of admitting that you are guilty, or you can dispute and say, I am innocent. Okay? Once you say you are innocent, the matter goes to trial, and on the basis of that, you can be convicted, or you can be found innocent, as you are alleging, for example. But if you are just using this act to grab people's property without the due process of taking them to court and ensuring the fact that the prosecution either confirms their innocence or their guiltiness, you are actually allowing people that it's okay to steal as long as you bring part of that back to the government. That's unacceptable. That is not the action of the government or administration that's committed to fighting corruption.
So I was going to really follow up by asking that, you know, when a specific piece of legislation or statute is being created or law, it should be there to fill a vacuum or plug what, you know, legal people will call a lacuna. So in us coming up with this Forfeiture of Proceeds of Crime Act of 2010, what were we really trying to cure? Because just like you've said, does the law provide that once I come out clean and forfeit, then prosecution is off the table? And are we as a country then perpetrating criminality to say it's okay to steal as long as I pay back part of it? Because I think the loudest forfeiture that we've heard of so far in the last 3 years is only the Faith Musonda forfeiture. Are we saying this is the only corruption that we've seen as a country?
No, it's not, and that's where the problem of using the Forfeiture Act, for example, is, because the way it is being used now, it's being abused to launder criminals or criminal activities, for example. What should happen, Costa, is that in addition to getting the recovery of assets, the covered asset, you should proceed to prosecute these people because they are admitting that what they have does not belong to them. But at the moment we are saying, if when you steal a lot, steal big, so that if the government asks you to retain part of what you have stolen, what you remain with is sufficient to cover the rest of your miserable existence on earth. That's why I'm saying that it's not enough in its own. What should follow, I don't know what the framers of that act were imagining, but what should follow is that in addition to recovery, you should prosecute these people, because when you have a criminal conviction, Costa, that is sufficient punishment. A conviction is a tag on your name, it's a stigma on your name. The fact that you go scot-free, Costa, once you have given part of your loot back to the state, is actually encouraging corruption, because all you are saying is that if you can just share what you have stolen, a little bit of what you have shared with the state, for example, then you can get out. You can get away with it. The case of
Dr. Sishuwa,
for example, there's no record of President admitting that she committed a crime, and she can go back to public office as we speak and do what she was doing.
So my question then, is it the aspect of legal capacity? Is it the aspect of competence of our investigators or investigative wings? Or is it merely an aspect of people cutting deals? Because we've heard of these forfeitures. I had the privilege of interviewing one lawyer, Makebi Zulu, representing, Milingo Lungu, on the discrepancy of, was it the issue of his over $23 million or something, and the state accepted that would be forfeited. What was termed the discrepancy in terms of what he was being owed in that KCM liquidation. But the case has gone cold, whether the state is going to pursue that particular matter for prosecution. In similar fashion, we've heard of other cases alike. Why do we see the dragging that a forfeiture is reached at, but taking the matter to court is really not happening? Is it an aspect of competence, or people just merely cutting deals?
I think that there are many professionals in the prosecution system, Zambia's prosecution system, who are very competent. They are young, some of them experienced, but they are very competent. So I'm not questioning their capacity. The problem, Costa, is twofold. The first is the lack of genuine political will to fight corruption. This is why we keep coming back to that point. It's very important. If you have a leader who is committed to fighting corruption, for example, Costa, the way President Mwansa was, for example, these issues you're talking about won't arise, because they will be following the letter, the law, to that, and make sure that they enforce it without any due regard to one's political affiliation. The second thing is what you have alluded to, the idea that they are cutting deals, for example. If you remember the case of Miringolungu, there was so much noise after DPP Lillian's union, DPP at the time, went into a deal with Miringolungu. The UPND at the beginning of that, of President Hichilema, for example, made noise about Lillian's, for example, that she was wrong in cutting out this deal. Fine, let's assume she was wrong, okay? What has come out of that? What came out is, once Miringolungu went to court to say, I struck a deal with, what's his name, Christopher Mundia, the legal advisor of the president. I struck a deal involving Bradford Machila, the principal private secretary of the president, for example. That issue never went anywhere. I think it has since been withdrawn from court. Why is that the case? Because if the matter goes to court,
there is a consent order of judgment on that matter. There's
the people who are involved in these deals are going to be exposed. So that deal making is what we should avoid. Because if you give the officials to make these private deals, who are you protecting? Let everybody be handled in a transparent manner, and the best platform for doing that is the courts.
I want to quickly turn, Dr. Sishuwa, to this article that you published in June of 2024, titled How President Hichilema is Using Lawfare to Subvert or Circumvert Democracy in Our Country. And you looked at a number of pillars, of our governance, the judiciary, the legislature, the Zambia police, the civil service, as well as the Electoral Commission of Zambia. You are so strong, really, on the assertions you make against, President Hichilema, citing the lack of separation of powers, and that he has, through his executive powers, sort of taken over the judiciary with his appointments, taken over Parliament with his appointment of a UPND speaker, hence he controls everything. Do you have, valid fundamental justifications over these very strong observations and assertions that you make, Doc?
I'll give you an example about how it's fair to undermine democracy, for example. Let's take the case of the police, for example. The Constitution of Zambia provides for the right of peaceful public assembly. That is what enables political parties, the opposition political parties, for example, to meet their members, to sell their manifestos, to say, Here is our program of action, and here's why you should vote for us, for example. Those political parties should have the right to meet their members anytime they want. The job of the police is to facilitate those meetings, not to block them. But what we are seeing over the last 3 years, for example, is the police, every time opposition parties want to assemble, to say we can't police your public assemblies because there are security concerns. We're never told what these security concerns are, or we don't have enough manpower to basically police your assemblies. When these political parties threaten to go ahead with their meeting, the police are never short of personnel to suppress these meetings, for example. If you look at what the law provides, the law says you should notify the police about your intention to hold a rally, for example, within 7 days, at least 7 days before the meeting. That's what the law provides. And if the police tell you to say, we cannot police your rally because of ABCD, you should provide an alternative date that will be suitable to both you and the police. But every time the opposition has done so, they have been told, except once, they have been told that you cannot, we don't have the police personnel to police your function, or their security concerns. Now, here's how lawfare functions. The explanation is legal, the motivation is political. I'll give you a very classic case that happened under PF for Edgar Lungu to show you that what Hichilema and his friends in the UPND are doing is a continuation of what we rejected the PF and the Edgar Lungu for. When Laura Mitty and her friends wanted to protest over the 42 fire tenders, for example, the police said, we cannot do it because we don't have enough manpower. They are going to be, on the same day, they are going to be attending the Minister of Finance to police parliament buildings that where the minister is representing the national budget. Can you suggest an alternative date? Laura Mitty and her friends said, no, we can't suggest an alternative date because the budget is a one-off event. So can you allow us to go ahead with our procession on this specific day? They said no. Laura Mitty and her friends proceeded to protest. But because their action is not provided for in the law, so the police have told them you can't go ahead, you could actually argue that they are violating the law because the police's response was within the confines of the law. The actions of Laura Mitty and their friends, however, was not. So when those protesters go ahead to protest, they are acting outside the law. You argue there that the police has done nothing wrong because they told these people that you can't protest because of ABCD, but they went ahead. That's how lawfare functions. The explanation is legal. The police will keep on telling us the opposition can't meet because we have other commitments, for example. That sounds legal. That's provided for by law. But the motivation behind that is political. General, you can't for 3 years, Costa, be telling people the same reasons. Say you can't enjoy your fundamental rights.
The Inspector General has been saying
we are busy.
That there are security concerns based on the fact that the opposition may be attacked. But obviously through Home Affairs and Internal Security Minister Jack Mwimbu now we are told that nobody should be stopped from holding these public gatherings, and obviously they've patted themselves on the back by saying they've given the citizens first, the Socialist Party, go ahead to start having these rallies. So is your argument still justified?
Yes, because just last week there were young people, youths of Zambia, who wanted to protest against the poor electricity delivery to citizens, for example. They blocked those citizens from protesting. If you are really committed to ensuring that citizens enjoy their rights, their freedom rights guaranteed by the Constitution, by the way, not Hichilema and his friend, guaranteed by the Constitution, why are you stopping people from protesting? If the citizens want to protest against Sishuwa or against Costa or against anyone, the job of the police is to facilitate that procession, not to say that is not sufficient reason for you to protest. It's your right. You have the right to exercise it. If in the course of protesting they commit crimes, you arrest them because they have committed a crime. But you can't stop citizens from enjoying their rights on the basis that, oh, elections are far away, for example, because the citizens have the right to organize themselves and meet their members. You see, what's astounding for me, Costa, is that these are the things the UPND and Hichilema and so forth opposed when they were done to them by the PF and Edgar Lungu. Why was it wrong to deny opposition parties the right to peacefully assemble under Lungu? But it's right under Hichilema. We must be very consistent at these things, and it's very embarrassing. It's very disappointing, you see, when you have a government constituted by men and women who were denied these rights by Edgar Lungu and his friends, the PF, doing the same thing that we condemn the PF. It's unacceptable. Let people have the freedom to enjoy these rights granted to them by the Constitution.
You, Dr. Sishuwa, were very, very critical of PF and the Edgar Lungu. You equally participated in taking matters to court, especially around the eligibility case of former President Lungu. Did you see a renewed hope after the August 2021 election with the New Dawn? And are you disappointed with the fact that you criticize these things and somebody else came in and the same things are happening? Are you disappointed? But as you answer that further, I just want you to also reflect on the current active issues, because you talk about them in your citation of the judiciary. The case that has been reopened now, we've been told the court is ready to hear the matter of eligibility. You predict that this is a ploy by the UPND to disqualify Edgar Lungu from contesting the election in 2026?
Yes, if I may start with your final point about the active court case. Of course, that matter is in court, and we are constrained in terms of what we can say about it. But we can say, however, that 3 points I can make on that one. The first is that at a personal level, I maintain that Edgar Lungu was not eligible to stand in the 2021 election. I have not changed my position at a personal position. The Constitutional Court delivered a judgment that said he was eligible to stand, and it was on the basis of that judgment that Edgar Lungu participated in the 2021 election. Okay? So to the extent that that judgment remains the judgment of the court, Lungu is eligible to participate in an election that will be called today or tomorrow in 2026, for example, because nothing has changed since that judgment was passed. My personal views about the Constitutional Court become secondary the moment the court pronounces itself to say Edgar Lungu is eligible. And I'm on record as I don't agree with that judgment for very different reasons that I've publicly given expression to. But once the judgment has been made, it means you and I are bound to go with that judgment. And if they say he's eligible to contest, then he stands. My problem with the current case that is before court is that the first is that if you look at what we did in 2021, it was to wait until Edgar Lungu had filed his papers before the Constitutional Court and confirmed that he was keen to participate in that election that we went to court. We couldn't preempt him to say he would be a candidate because we didn't know. But what the UPND through their youth has done, because I'm saying the UPND because Mlambo Haimbe, when he was Minister of Justice, made it very clear that this process was in motion and this youth will come forth, and eventually that happened. What the UPND has done through a particular individual is to go to court and say, can you declare that Edgar Lungu is not eligible to contest the 2021 election or in the future election, for example? I have a problem with that, Costa, because if you are going back to 2021, for example, then the court should pronounce itself and say, if Edgar was not eligible to stand in 2021, they should declare that election now and void, for example, because a court judgment should have consequences. You can't say you violated the Constitution, but there will be no punishment, because you are then saying it's okay to violate the Constitution. So if your interest is in 2021, you should also be prepared to say that election that took place because it was unconstitutional by the fact that it featured somebody who was not eligible to stand. It should be nullified. I don't know where they will get the power to do so.
The legal dynamics, just a rider, the legal dynamics, not just a rider.
Let me just finish this. Costa, before you come in, if their target is 2026, for example, how do they know that Edgar will be interested in standing in 2026, for example? You are preempting. You are basically doing mind reading. That's not provided for in the law. But if you can't say Lungu is going to be a candidate in 2026 until and unless he has actually gone ahead and filed his nominations, which is why we waited until he had done so in the last election, for example. Because if you are going to start suing people to say you should declare that person and that person as ineligible from standing, What stops me from suing somebody like you, Costa, to say the Constitutional Court should declare you as ineligible to stand in 2021 when you have not told me or anyone that you are going to stand in the 2026 election?
So
you can see the difficulties of the current case.
If you may allow me just to ride on what you've explained, the legal dynamics on the fact that the Constitutional Court, in accordance with our court hierarchy, is a court of finality in terms of constitutional matters and presidential, petitions. The question that many citizens are asking is that, like you rightfully said, Dr. Sishuwa, is that when a court makes a ruling, it becomes precedence. Is it possible that with this case reopened, that the court can pronounce itself that they did err and overturn their own ruling? Others are also relating it to what is currently obtaining in the USA with the renegade on the Roe versus Wade. Do we see, or is it possible for a court to again pronounce itself that they made a wrong call?
Oscar, there has to be finality to these things. You cannot keep on beating the system until you get a response that you want. If, for example, let's take this case, for example, if the Constitutional Court rules that Edgar Lungu is not eligible to stand in the future election, for example, what stops anyone else from going back to the same court to say, can you revisit this same ruling that you just made, for example? So at what point do you say this is final, for example? That's why I'm saying, on this current matter, for example, what is problematic are the political origins of this matter. Costa, Mulambo Haimbe told Zambia that 2021 ruling was not the correct ruling, implying that the correct ruling is the one that should have declared Edgar as ineligible, for example. And they said very soon we are going to see Zambians, citizens, going back to the Constitutional Court to revisit that court case. The very fact that that suggestion came from a minister in the executive, a member of the UPND, tells you the political origins or undertones that underpin this case. The problem, Costa, is that if you have the Constitutional Court going to make a ruling that Edgar Lungu is not eligible, and they provide a reasonable judgment, for example, it would confirm suspicion that the new judges that have come in the Constitutional Court are there to serve the interest of the UPND, because nothing has changed in the material circumstances of that case. The law hasn't changed. The judges haven't changed apart from the new one. The only thing that has changed is that Edgar Lungu is no longer president. Hichilema is now the president. So what does he do? He appoints 4 new judges in February or April last year, 2023. Then a couple of months later, his minister stands up and says, oh, that judgment that was passed was the incorrect judgment, suggesting the right one is the one that should have been the opposite of that. I cannot defend the judgment that was passed by the Constitutional Court myself. It was wrong. But if your motivation for going back to court is to exclude Edgar Lungu after he said he's coming back to politics, I have a problem with that, because, you see, if you give me an election tomorrow, Costa, I should make the determination to choose. I know what Edgar Lungu has done to the country, his record on corruption and democratic backslide, for example, means I cannot vote for him. But I also now know what Hichilema is capable of doing, because the virginity that he enjoyed before 2021 has been exposed now after the last 3 years. He has actually shown that he's just another Edgar Lungu with a better PR. But other voters should be given the right to decide whether to vote for Edgar Lungu or to vote for Hichilema or vote for somebody else. But when that decision is determined by the executive who's maneuvered to say, we don't want Edgar Lungu on the ballot, for example, as the primary motivation, and the judges actually go ahead and do that, they are damaging the integrity of the justice system.
Dr. Sishuwa, just like you say, it's too early. It's like jumping the gun to petition this matter before Edgar Lungu files in his nominations for candidacy. It's like they're predicting an outcome already. Isn't it also too premature for you to assume that this is the ploy of President Hichilema and doubting the integrity? You've come out so strong in this article, implicating that 3 out of the possible 5 judges that may hear this case are pro-Hichilema, are pro-UPND, and you predict also prematurely that they will rule against their previous decision. Are you also not jumping the gun?
No, I'm not. I've given you factual basis of my opinion. The first is this. Before 2021, Hichilema committed himself to making institutional reforms, including those that affect the judiciary, because he was very critical of the Constitutional Court, including the Constitutional Court judges there, as I was. And I agreed with him on that point, that that Constitutional Court is a danger to Zambia's democracy as it was presently constituted, both in terms of putting it at par with the Supreme Court, making it the final court on constitutional matters, for example. Because if you have incompetent judges, for example, you are going to be stuck with those incompetent judges until they are dead. So what does he do? He promised us, if you elect me president, I will make sure that I put in place institutional reform that will ensure that the mechanism of appointing judges to this court, for example, are transparent, and we get competent people into those positions. What did we do? What did we see when he came to power? He did the same thing that Edgar was doing. All he does is not to change the law. So let's go to Parliament and convince MPs to say, listen, this current constitution is flawed in this way. Can we abolish the Constitutional Court or make it a division of the High Court, or make sure that the people who end up in the Constitutional Court are people of impeccable credentials after a rigorous public scrutiny of these individuals that end up there? He doesn't do that. What does he do? He appoints his own people to the same board, the same thing that Edgar Lungu was doing. Can you tell me, Costa, how the people that Hichilema has appointed those constitutional court were identified? We don't have a mechanism of knowing how judges
are they not competent? Don't they meet the requirements of what a court judge should be in terms of the number of years they've served?
Well, if you look at the current judges that were there before Hichilema made these judges, the same argument was advanced by the PL, that these judges meet the requirements. Hichilema was critical of that. If that court was unacceptable in its form when he was in opposition, what has made it acceptable now? That's why I'm saying, if he was really committed to institutional reform, the first thing he would have done before offloading more individuals onto that bench is to change the law so that the people who end up on that bench are people of impeccable credentials without question. Not to simply use a flawed system, you pump in more people there.
What's the basis that you use, Dr. Sishuwa?
Let me finish this point.
What's the basis?
What's the basis that you use? This case as an example, for example.
No, I'm asking you, what is the basis that you are using to discredit their credentials and integrity?
The very basis that Hichilema used to discredit the credential of the court when it was in. I'm not talking about the individuals. I'm talking about the institutional basis for the establishment of the Constitutional Court. If you look at the Constitutional Court provision in the Constitution right now, for example, you just say the president shall appoint judges of this court, for example. The mechanism of doing so, like if I'm interested in applying to become a judge of the Constitutional Court, there should be a transparent mechanism of saying, you submit your CVs, you apply, you are interviewed this way, public scrutiny is involved. Everything must be clear so that we know that if Costa ends up as the judge of the High Court, it wasn't because he's a member of the UPND. It wasn't because he knows some people in the Judicial Service Commission whom he gave the Judicial Service Commission. But you have a scenario where the Judicial Service Commission that appoints judges and the Judicial Competence Commission that recommended the of judges, none of the institutional measures that established these bodies have been changed. HH was critical of these things. So if you are really committed to resolving the issue of why we are where we are in terms of, the state of our democracy, the basis upon which judges are appointed and disciplined must change. Working on that, this is a bipartisan issue. Even the PA, for example, and other parties should be brought together to say, how can we strengthen our justice system before I bring in more people? But if you simply leave that structure as intact and you bring in your own people, then you are doing the very thing that Edgar was doing. And people can assume, with reasonable excuse, that you're just putting your own people there, the same thing that you accused Edgar Lungu of doing. Can we work on institutional reform that will ensure that the men and women who end up before the judiciary or several benches are people who have been there, who find themselves there because they have passed through a rigorous test in terms of the mechanism of their appointment, rather than people who are close to those who make the decision.
Dr. Sishuwa, you are accusing the president of collusion with the judiciary and the Speaker to sort of wipe out the PF as an opposition. You're accusing the executive through the President, the police, and the judiciary of targeting opposition leaders such as Fred Member, Edith Nawakwe, and the like before the 2026 election. Are you saying that you have lost confidence entirely in the credibility, integrity of our judiciary, of our legislature, in respect to the expulsion of the 9 PF members who the court, when they appealed, upheld their appeal and they're back in Parliament? So isn't there some level of integrity and independence in our courts following that, stay by the courts?
I am saying that I am disappointed that Hichilema and his friends in the UPND are doing the very wrong thing that we condemned under PF and Edgar Lungu, for example. If you look at the example of how the PF cases have been handled, I'm very critical of that, and I've written more extensively than I can explain here. If you go to court and you say you have been expelled from your party, you go to court and your case is properly filed. There are 2 things that the Constitutional Court, is allowed by law to do in terms of making a ruling. The first is to confirm your expulsion and say the party which expelled you was on legitimate ground to expel you. So it confirms that. The second alternative one is to say the party which expelled you was wrong. It lacked the basis upon which it should have expelled you, therefore your expulsion is now void. It's similar to how we deal with the presidential petition. Once the petition is properly filed before a court, the court's role is to confirm that the election was flawed and proper fresh election, or to say the election was beyond the reproach and therefore the election results should stand. Both in the election petition and in the case involving the PFM that went to the Constitutional Court, what we saw was the court departing from what the law provides for. If an MP has asked you to reverse their expulsion, look at what the Constitution provides for. Did the court do that? They didn't. That's one example. The other one, of course, is a scenario where you look at the behavior of government institutions such as the Judicial societies, the police, in relation to Mao and Past Convention, for example. The executive has made it very clear in terms of its interest by protecting Mao, for example, when it comes to giving him the policeman on a holiday, 24th, I think it was last year, on 24th October, when he held his sham convention, for example. Then within 24 hours, the police, finished the process of fingerprint clearance at the same time when other applicants who had even submitted their own staff in the police much earlier had not been served, for example. You can see the interest of the state. Mao, of course, is beamed on television, NBC television, is given state security. What is the interest of the state in this thing? But the blatant case happened at the Judicial Society. There was that woman, I don't know, I've forgotten her name, but I think it was Tandiwe Mahinde or something. The way she was pressured to make sure she accepts the sham, result of that sham convention in Mao Sampa is what led to her removal from that position, for example, and subsequently they proved that whether it's Maria Mulenga, I think, to conclude the process. In Costa, no reasonable Zambian outside supporters, and even supporters of the UPND, they have to be zero supporters, can conclude that what is happening in the PF is simply a matter of internal party politics within the former opposition, the former ruling party. No, the involvement of the executive is what is destroying the thing. What's happening in the PF Costa doesn't just affect the PF, it affects the state and quality of our democracy. I don't have to like the PF or Edgar Lungu to defend their rights. In fact, I will vote against the PF or Edgar Lungu if they stand for elections. But when their rights are affected, it's your duty, as it is mine, to make sure that we defend their rights, because what we are doing is far beyond the interest of that particular association. Our democracy is stronger when you have a stronger opposition. The job of the executive, the job of the UPND, is to deliver their campaign promises, not to undermine the opposition, because that affects the strength of our democracy.
For the sake of time, as we conclude, Dr. Sishuwa, you have come out strongly in predicting that President Hichilema would most likely lose power or lose the election in 2026. owing to the fact that we've got a faltering economy. On the other hand, the president, his cohorts and his sympathizers believe that he inherited a very, very ill economy, prone with debt, which he's managed to restructure. They're undergoing a drought, which has necessitated hunger as well as, a power deficit. He's trying to renegotiate to bring back mines into operation, like bringing IRH into Mopani, Vedanta back into KCM, increasing CDF, free education, and so on. So there are others who believe that the president is on the right track and very formidable to take this country forward beyond 2026. Is it personal for you that you're so bitter, like you say, that you're disappointed? And do you see any alternative solution in terms of political leadership outside in the opposition as opposed to the current UPND leadership?
Well, Costa, there are 2 points I think that you have said there. The first has to have a fair assessment of the UPND's performance so far. There are areas where you can give them credit, for example, especially in relation to the basic minimum in terms of what you would say legal reforms, for example. One of the things that they did well is the passage of the Access to Information Law. I know, for example, that the decision to pass the ATI Act was not out of their own volition. It was part of the requirement from the IMF, that's the International Monetary Fund, as part of the debt structuring measures. And I think because of that, you find that when you read the ATI Act, you discover that what it gives with the right hand, it takes with the left hand, for example. That's largely because the premise on which it was founded was not voluntary on the part of the government. Even now, it is yet to be operationalized. Why? There was no genuine commitment to passing that law, for example. But you can give them the minimum credit to say, at least they have taken us a step further. We can work on that and change it and strengthen it in the future. If they themselves, for example, are afraid that is, operationalizing it will result in the exposure of the depth of the road under their administration. The second one is on the death penalty. They passed the death penalty, I think, in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, in December, if it's not a year later. And that's good because it enhances human rights, for example. We have always said, the death penalty, as human rights defenders, we have always opposed that death penalty because we think you can't defend life by taking another life. So one has to commend Hichilema and his friends in government on that front, for example. But this is a very bare minimum. It's harmless because, in fact, if you look at the last survey on the matter, 9 out of 10 provinces in Zambia favor the retention of the death penalty. But Hichilema demonstrated courage to actually go and say, we don't need this law because it undermines human rights and we are going to do away with it. To the extent that he has done that, it's fine. What I think is crucial in terms of the commitment of the government to protecting rights is in relation to those human rights like peaceful assembly, freedom of expression, that remain to be seen in terms of improvement on that score. Then you have the criminal defamation of the president law. Again, you have to give credit to Hichilema and his friends here because as a bare minimum, they have done the right thing. So that's commendable. The problem is that they are now abusing other laws, such as criminal defamation that remains the penal code, to achieve the same outcomes. You can't abolish the criminal defamation on the one hand, and then you use the criminal defamation in the penal code that has remained to achieve the same outcomes. If you are really committed, can you strike out also, and I ask Hichilema and his friends to do so, to strike out that provision in the Constitution that has enabled government officials to sue people using the state? Costa, if I'm aggrieved, or if Yamasaka is aggrieved by what Savoy has said, for example, it should be a civil matter. The state should not be involved. It's abuse of those laws that undermine genuine progressive changes such as the defamation, the removal of the defamation law from the statute, for example. So you have to give Hichilema credit there. Where I have problems, Costa, is on other fundamental broad issues. You have to understand what it is that Zambians voted against and for in 2021. When Zambians kicked out Edgar Lungu and his friends from power, they were saying no to tribal and regional divisions, for example. Under the PF, we saw this. there was a situation where appointment to public positions, and especially in the civil service as well, had an ethnic regional character, with Bembas and Easterners being the dominant one. We condemned that. I was one of those who condemned, especially the marginalization of Tongas and other Zambians, the northwestern and western provinces, for example. What have we seen now? We have seen a reversal. Now it's Roses, Tongas, and Northwesterners who are enjoying that dominance, for example. What does that create? It creates a vicious cycle, because the next leader who comes, if they come from the region which was marginalized, they are going to do the opposite. At what point do we stop and actually say, can we put in place laws that will ensure that if you have a Bemba as director, the deputy should come from the other region, you have to be deliberate the way the Kenyan Constitution has made this issue deliberate, to say, the same way we see the absence of women, for example, in key positions, in the same way we should see the absence of Zambians from other ethnic groups, from other regions in public position. But what Hichilema and his friends are doing is the opposite of what Edgar and his friends were doing here. That is as wrong when done by Edgar as it is wrong when done by Hichilema. That's one broad issue. And this is a serious matter. This tendency of dismissing this matter to say, if you say this kind of things, you'll be arrested with sedition or whatever, that won't take us anywhere. What we need is a proper national conversation on this subject. I know it's sensitive, and I know it's not easy, but we should have an easy and difficult subject if we are to move forward. Otherwise, we are perpetuating a vicious cycle here. The second issue is the economy, for example. Hichilema was elected to improve the economy. If you tell me now, has the cost of living been reduced? No. Have the mining problems in the country's strategic sector been resolved? No. So why should Zambians elect Hichilema and his friends if, for example, on the issue of ethnic divisions, on the issue of the economy, and on the issue of the corruption that you have discussed, nothing has substantially changed? You can't say Hichilema and his friends should be retained to power because there is no political alternative.
So for you,
Zambians must have shown consistently that they are very, very good at voting out leaders, not voting in.
So Dr.
That's how Hichilema himself ended up as president, because we were punishing Edgar Lungu and his PF, and Hichilema became the recipient of that accidental revulsion against him.
Very quickly, so with that established, you still say and stick to the fact that for you, President Hichilema is going out in 2026 and he has failed to deliver?
Well, if you look at the UPND narrative, Costa, over the last 3 years, is to say that we are going to win the election because Zambia currently doesn't have a strong opposition, okay, to unseat the UPND. That is the consistent narrative. So in part, what the UPND has done from day one is that they want people to buy in. It's this idea that retain us, not because we don't have an alternative. But how do you know that there will be no alternative in 2026? Well, we are in 2024, Costa. In a democracy, for example, your job, if you're in government, is to deliver your campaign promises. And that should be the focus of the UPND. Not to stop the PF, not to create division in the PF in the hope that you are destroying the main opposition party, not to arrest opposition leaders like Sean Tembo, Wakwi, Fred Membe, and them, or to even target other people who may come up like John Sangoy, frivolous cases, in the hope that you are going to undermine those people. No, that's not your job. The primary reason why Hichilema and his friends were elected or put in power was to resolve our problems: road shedding, corruption, democracy, the economy. Because if voters would have decided, Costa, that they don't want HH and his friends in the UPND in 2026, nothing will stop them. They can put their supporters at the helm of the Electoral Commission of Zambia, at the helm of the police, for example. But if the people would have decided by then that we don't want him, they will find anyone to express that revulsion against Hichilema, because we live in an era, Costa, where outright opposition to one candidate, rather than genuine support for the candidate voted for, is becoming the norm, increasingly across democracies in the world. We didn't like Edgar Lungu and what the PF were doing, and we said, because we don't want Edgar Lungu, we would vote for anyone but Lungu. Okay, that's how we voted for Hichilema. It's not because Hichilema put up a very compelling national program. If you ask Zambians who voted for Hichilema on the Kua Belt, in Rapula, in Northern, in Eastern Province, why did you vote for Hichilema? They don't tell you that Hichilema was the best candidate among those who stood. They will tell you that he was the best person who could be used to remove Edgar and his friends from power, because Edgar Lungu stopped listening. You know what? Edgar Lungu and his PF friends pushed Zambia to a war where they had to choose anybody but him and his friends, because they didn't listen on the broad issues. Hichilema is pushing Zambia. The same thing. I don't understand why politicians don't learn from the failures of their friends. If you keep dividing Zambia and the ethnic region, if you fail to fight corruption, if you don't improve the economy, the fate that made the PF is likely to be for Hichilema and his friends in the UPND.
Thank you so much for talking to me on Costa this evening, all the way from your base in South Africa via, Zoom, Dr. Sishuwa. It's been a pleasure having this discussion.
Thank you so much for having me.
That wraps up Costa for tonight. My guest, historian Dr. Sishuwa Sishuwa. We've been discussing the fight against corruption as well as the state of Zambia's democracy. Remember, you can follow this discussion on our live Facebook stream. It's Diamond TV Zambia. Also on our YouTube page, Diamond TV Zambia. Good night. Thanks for watching.
Costa was brought to you by FQM Trident Limited, a subsidiary of First Quantum Minerals Limited.